Okay, folks, welcome back. This is another Hypnosis Masters interview series. My name is Igor Ledochowski from the hypnosistrainingacademy.com. And today's Hypnosis Master is someone I think you'll really enjoy. I'm really looking forward to introducing him to you. His name is James Tripp. He is from the UK. His website is hypnosiswithouttrance.com. It's all one word. You'll see it in your notes as well. And before we go into a little bit more about James, let's just welcome James on board. So first of all, James, hello and welcome to the call today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a real pleasure for me also. I've enjoyed your work. I've seen a lot of your work over the years. And one of the reasons I really am looking forward to our conversation today is because I think you have a really interesting and unique look at two things. One is the actual hypnotic process itself. I think you are one of these people who enjoys using Occam's razor and simplifying. I really look forward to discussions around that comes up later today. And the other thing that I think people are really going to take out of today is you are, I think maverick's not quite the right word. You're happy to be an iconoclast. You don't get stuck on hypnotic traditions. You are always interested in what makes it work, and you're willing to push the envelope and keep moving things forward. And there's a mindset in how you got to where you are today that I'm really looking forward to exploring, because I think people who are going to listen to this call today are going to learn a tremendous amount from your personal journey. So I think these are going to be some really exciting things for you guys listening right now. So James, maybe we can kind of get the ball rolling with a little bit of background about yourself. I'm presuming you weren't born into this world a fully fledged hypnotist with hypnotic powers oozing out of your fingertips, that you were a mere mortal like the rest of us who somehow got drawn to this field for your own interests. Would that be fair in thinking that?
It is indeed fair. If I tell the story, the starting point can vary, and it depends on which antecedents or precedents that I look at. So one of the things that was true for me is I grew up with a lot of insecurity and fear for whatever reason. That was a huge thing for me. A lot of social anxiety, and it really came to a head in my teens, particularly when I left school, because I left all these groups I'd been used to and stuff, and I had to get out into the big wide world.
Right.
And I had a real sense that I was not well adapted, put it that way, for the big wide world. And I figured that I would have to sort that out. I had a big mind shift at the time. When I was about 19, I was feeling very sorry for myself, and I had this sort of blinding flash that said, the world is not going to reorganize itself to suit your needs.
Well, that's actually a pretty important realization to make so young, because otherwise there's a lot of people who've been stuck in this waiting for the world to change before they get better, but you didn't, right?
No, I didn't. I felt that I had to change something about me, what I was doing. And to be truthful, I had no idea where to begin.
Right.
No idea whatsoever. So I started to just grab, I was clutching at straws. I started to read a load on quantum physics to begin with, which I thought if I understood the underlying nature of the universe, then surely that would give me some leverage. But interesting as it was, it didn't really make the difference.
Right.
And I ended up in my early 20s doing a philosophy degree as an attempt to figure out life, the universe, and everything.
Right.
Of course, anyone that studied philosophy in the Anglo-American analytic tradition will know you're going to get more answers than questions through studying a philosophy degree.
Right. And the key thing here is, because I think you just put your finger on the button here, the modern philosophy doesn't really live up to its old ancient roots, which is about learning how to live better. It's all wrapped up in its own constructs of logic and all that sort of stuff. And it doesn't really help you to develop a path in life. What's my path going to be? Which is really what it used to be. That's what it's supposed to be. Only we've weirdly lost touch with that, right?
I absolutely agree. On the degree I did, we did some stuff around ethics and Aristotle and Plato, and also some pre-Socratic stuff like Heraclitus, who actually a lot of the teachings from Heraclitus stuck with me more. And I found them more useful. And later on I've looked back and realized that I dodged continental philosophy, and that I might have actually got more useful stuff out of that as well, but I'm not going to geek out too much in these distinctions.
So you're generally looking for a direction of health. Philosophy was an idea for building up your mind. Didn't quite do what you needed it to, but at least gave you a direction. And then what else were you doing at the time?
Well, another big thing that came to me at the time is came from my mother, actually. She came home one day and gave me a book she'd found in a bargain bin called The Art of Qigong.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I had no point of reference for this, and I had no idea why she would think I would want it, but she gave it to me, and I looked at it, and I got hooked instantly because of what it promised. It basically promised if I practiced this Qigong, I would develop wonderful health, strength, confidence, charisma, and even psychic powers. So,
Right.
I was like, yeah, I'm in for this.
Absolutely, right? It speaks to all the pain that you were already experiencing at the time.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah, that was a big thing. So I started practicing these exercises, and my goodness, they had a huge impact for me.
Awesome.
Which may have been placebo. I don't know.
Right.
But frankly, I was willing to take the upside on that one.
Absolutely.
And roll with that. And that's something that I followed, and it got me into the Chinese internal martial arts, Tai Chi Chuan, Bagua which got me into Russian martial arts.
Right.
And that was a big thing for me, learning that stuff.
Just to kind of jump in there a little bit, this is interesting because you've actually, in doing these more internal Chinese systems, as of course you know, but maybe the listeners aren't quite aware of, you've gone from the Western philosophical tradition, which you did at university, and you just turned it to the Eastern philosophical tradition, which is embedded in the practical nature of these martial arts. So this is the upside of the Chinese martial arts. It's rooted in actual physical practice. It's about changing yourself, not about having some crazy idea that no one else can understand, right?
Absolutely, it's practical, pragmatic stuff. They often use the term internal alchemy within the internal martial arts traditions, internal transformation.
Right.
And it was good for me on numerous levels. Number one, there was a cultural shift, which said basically it's got nothing to do with talent or how strong or how weak you are. It's got everything to do with your willingness to apply yourself to this art and this understanding.
Now, this is a very important point because, again, people think that if they don't get hypnosis the first time round, that's it, they're not cut out for it. Whereas you were inculcated into a system of thought that said, no, talent is irrelevant. What matters is, are you willing to roll your sleeves up and work and keep working until you got what you want, right?
Absolutely. And to be truthful, to begin with, I was skeptical. I was sure. I remember when I first heard this, I laughed at the guy and I said, surely talent's got something to do with it.
Right.
And he said, no, it has absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. So I kind of stuck with this and kept hearing this message, and it had me do something I'd never done before. When I was younger, I used to hit the sticking point in learning a skill or something, and I'd roll over and go, well, it's just not for me. But it had me hanging the game, and ultimately I developed pretty healthy levels of skill with those Chinese internal martial arts. I ended up becoming a teacher, an instructor of Tai Chi Chuan and Sistema. And it was a game changer for me in terms of my life. And it was a huge prequel to getting into NLP, hypnosis, and what I humorously call brain wrangling.
So how did that happen then? Because I can see the clear foundation here. You're already being drawn towards the mental arts, shall we say, or the brain wrangling, as you put it there. The philosophy degree clearly is drawing in that direction. The Chinese martial arts, you didn't go for the external martial arts, which still have a good grounding in philosophy, but you went to the internal ones, which really intensify its investigation of the self in many ways. So you've got a very good foundation here for hypnosis, but at the moment, I presume your life still hasn't crossed paths with hypnosis per se. Would I be right in thinking that?
Well, I would say yes and no, because when I first came to Tai Chi Chuan, the first person I trained with, there was a real energy head, what I would call an energy head, and he did all this empty force stuff and threw people around without touching them.
Right.
And when I first turned up at his class, he did this at the end with the senior students. He's propelling them across the room without touching them. And I was aghast. I said, can you do that to me? He said, well, your chi is not strong enough yet.
Of course.
Yeah. So I turned up to these classes, and every week I'd watch, mesmerized by these people being thrown across the room. I mean that term metaphorically mesmerized, or perhaps literally later on. And after sort of 5-6 weeks, I guess when he saw that I was sticking around, he beckoned me over to the sort of sacred spot where I'd seen all the action happening.
Right.
Which I could now recognise as there being some serious anchoring going on, and
Of course,
all sorts
of
of
course.
things here. And he took me through the process, and I was completely. He basically He did a full body lock on me, which was
Right.
framed as a chi manipulation.
Of course. Of course.
And then he, led me around and controlled me in various ways, and it was incredibly real and incredibly vivid.
Right. And of course, importantly, from the point of view of hypnotic technique, you've been spending 5 weeks being drawn into this thought system, right?
Absolutely, well primed indeed. Just absolutely ready to go. So, I took this. I thought this was absolutely amazing. It was such a profound and vivid experience. But I'm quite a critical thinker as well. So I got home and I considered what had occurred, and I thought, can I do this to myself? And I did it like a hand lift on myself. I thought, well, I can float my hand with chi, and I could do it, and I could get the full feeling of me floating my hand with chi. And then I thought, well, I can do it. Can I stop it? And yes, I could. I could stop it. And I went back to him and I said, that was mind-blowing. The thought occurred to me, because I've heard of this thing called hypnosis. Could this be hypnosis? So I said to the guy, is this hypnosis? He said, well, he said that they're similar things, he said. He said to me, hypnosis is a manipulation of the chi of the mind, and this is a manipulation of the chi of the body.
Right.
That's what he said.
So, of course, he's using his own frame of reference to explain his results.
Right, yeah. And I didn't stay with that teacher for very long, because I got really deep into the martial arts side, and I wanted something a bit more pragmatic, and I ended up moving on to different teachers quite quickly. But I have to say that experience stayed with me, and it influences me to this day in how I do hypnosis.
Wonderful.
I guess stuff I learned from him. Yeah.
You have a very strong personal reference experience of actually having hypnotic phenomena working on you. And on you in a naive mind, you were relatively unconditioned, and of course there was a conditioning process, a priming process in those 5 weeks that led up to it. But of course, I'm sure that's influenced your work to realize, because he did no formal induction on you, did he? It's not like he said, look into my eyes, go sleep, go deeper, deeper. Now you fly across a room. He just did it, and that puts a different frame on hypnosis when you eventually come to it, right?
Right, and in a sense he did do something you could call an induction. You could map it out in terms of hypnosis, and you could say, oh, this bit here was the induction. Or what I would call pulling somebody into the loop, because that's how I see inductions, as being as a way of drawing somebody into a response set.
Right.
So by the way I look at inductions, I could say he did an induction, but not one that you would recognize with sleep, deeper, or anything like that. Yeah, but interesting to map in terms of process, and to me there was nothing different about how he was doing what he was doing and how I do what I do now.
Right. Well, it's an important reference experience, and that's probably why you were freed from the tyranny of formal inductions, just from having this very early informal reference experience, right?
Certainly, I think that would be a seed. It wasn't something I ever really consciously considered when I was getting into learning hypnosis, but that doesn't mean that seed wasn't clearly laid there in my unconscious.
So then how did that transition happen? How did you go from you're currently big into the martial arts to getting a lot of personal benefits? So it seems as though you've reached your goal, your insecurities are starting to erode, you're getting more confident, you're learning to cope with the world in a better way. So everything you're looking for, you're getting. What made you go to the next step then to carry on looking at hypnosis or NLP as a thing?
Well, I was getting a lot of what I wanted, but I still had all this kind of social anxiety stuff going on.
Okay.
I was teaching classes, Tai Chi classes, Sistema classes, and once I got into the flow of teaching the class, I was fine. But I used to wait in the car park for the beginning of my class, and I would make sure I was a minute or two late for my own class.
Right.
To avoid the agony of having to socialize with my students beforehand.
Yeah.
So it's a very powerful thing for me, that fear.
Of course. So you still were driven. So you saw results. You know that it's possible for you to heal, but you hadn't finished your journey yet. So you're still looking for other sources of for doing that, right?
Yeah, and that was a clear motivation, because what occurred, and this is probably a similar story for many, many people out there, but I think it's about 2001, and I was just watching late night television, and the Jonathan Ross show came on.
Right. I remember that one very well.
Yeah, and there's this guy, Darren Brown, on.
Yeah.
And I think he'd done his very first TV special, and it had hit big. I hadn't seen the TV special, so this was the first time I'd seen him.
Yeah.
And he did this stuff with Jonathan Ross, and he did this stuff with the band, the house band there.
Yeah.
And my mouth just dropped open, and I thought, whatever that guy's doing, I'm learning it.
Yeah.
I'm learning that.
Yeah.
Now, probably if I hadn't had the reference experience of having developed the Tai Chi skills and the Sistema skills, my old mindset would have said, wow, that's amazing, he's so talented and gifted, and I wouldn't have gone to learn it.
Right.
But because of this shift and this exposure to this culture of working on skills, I just looked and I said, right, I want that, I'm going to get that.
And that's, that's a very powerful attitude that's not to be underrated. I see this also a lot in students that are afraid, can I do this, am I good enough, and so on. And that's the wrong mindset to have. Anyone can do this. The only question is, how much are you willing to work to get it? And it's true, some people have to work a bit harder. Some people may need to get it a little bit easier. But ultimately, whether it's easy for you or not is irrelevant. What matters is, are you willing to stay the distance? And that's what your martial arts training really taught you. It's the ability to stick at it despite any humps that come across the way, right?
For sure. And there's a distinction I often share with people I'm mentoring these days, which is interest versus commitment. And you see a lot of people who have an interest in learning something. It may be martial arts, it may be a musical instrument, it may be hypnosis or NLP, and they may have a very strong interest in learning it, real, genuine, authentic interest. But until it becomes a commitment, I'm learning that. That's it. There's a sort of a threshold, and I've known people who for years ago, I'd love to learn a martial art. Oh, it would be fantastic. I don't doubt that it's true, and they never take action. You say, well, learn one then. Well, and out come the reasons why they can't. Right. But
this reminds me of a bit of advice I got very early on in my career. I think it's very similar to what you're talking about here, which is, there's two kinds of people in the world: those that get results and those that have reasons why they didn't get those results. Which do you want to be, right? Yeah.
It reminds me of I think I heard Paul McKenna say this, or I read it in one of his books absolutely years ago, which was a great line. You can either have what you want, or you can have your excuses for not having it.
Yes, exactly. And it sounds like your martial arts basically put a line in the sand on your excuses. No excuses, you can do it. It's just a question of how much you're willing to dedicate yourself to.
Right. I'd learned a lot about learning from the martial arts as well. That's a hugely significant piece for me there.
Yeah. Well, especially the internal arts, which is all about sensing what's going on inside you, versus the external, which are a little bit more forgiving with misalignments and stuff, right?
Yeah, and that years of doing the Neigong, the internal work, also developed an inner acuity to me that has proved incredibly valuable in self-facilitating personal change. I do a lot of what you could call self-hypnosis stuff. I do a lot of self-application work. Awesome. It's a big thing for me, and I think that a lot of the skill I developed in internal acuity from those martial arts days, internal martial arts days, have been a huge bonus for that.
I can believe it, absolutely. Now this kind of feeds into the NLP thing, because NLP is all about acuity as well, although it tends to focus more on external acuity rather than internal acuity, like the Chinese martial arts. How did this develop? So right now you're inspired by Darren Brown. You've seen his show, and it is fun. It's really, his framework, I think, is fantastic. And it's also fooled a lot of hypnotists into believing things that aren't strictly speaking possible that way can be done in a way that is a little unusual. But then you were one of millions who were blown away by his show. What made you different? What is it that got you to pursue further, and how did that develop into your career in hypnosis?
Well, certainly there was that moment of I'm learning that, and the first thing I did is I jumped onto what was back then called the internet.
Yes.
A very different looking thing from how it is now, and I Yahoo'd up, or it would have been some long dead search engine now. I don't know, is Yahoo still a search engine? I don't have no idea.
Yeah, go on.
And I found this resource page, which was just a list of books.
Right.
It basically said, if you want to know what Darren Brown does, here's a list of books. And there must have been 20 books on that list.
Right.
And there are a few that I picked off and I bought. One of them was, there were two particularly that really influenced me hugely. One of them was called Magic and Showmanship by a guy called Henning Nelms. And the other one was Introducing NLP by John O'Connor and Joseph Seymour. John Seymour, Joseph O'Connor.
John Seymour. John
Seymour,
exactly,
Joseph O'Connor. And these books were both great in their own way. The NLP book was a real game changer. In that I read half of it, and it just it was such. It was like if my brain was a pancake, someone had just flipped it up in the air and turned it upside down.
I can understand that. I had a very similar reaction with my first NLP book too.
Right, I was overwhelmed. There was so many fresh new perspectives on life and human beings in there. But the huge thing that came out of that book for me was the idea that people are patterned, and that what we see as people's personality, their thinking skills, everything about how they do life is patterned. And if you can decode those patterns and figure them out, you could learn them. And that for me was, oh wow. So this insecurity thing that I feel is a pattern, it's learned. I can learn quote unquote confidence, or I can learn charisma, or I can learn so that was
and I'm sure that fed into your experiences with the Chinese martial arts, because you had learned some very sophisticated and complex things, and you still learned them, even though at some point you thought you'd never be able to, right?
Absolutely. So, it was all kind of dovetailing together for me, what I got from the martial arts. So I plunged into, now at the time, my view was I can't afford an NLP practitioner training.
Right.
Which may or may not have been true, but certainly
it's the story you told yourself.
It's the story I told myself, and I think that my girlfriend at the time wouldn't have appreciated, who is my wife now, wouldn't have appreciated us spending the money on that.
Of course.
But I got deeply into self-learning, and I studied from books, and I found resources, and I made it my mission to teach myself this stuff. And I focused initially on the kind of Milton model side, the conversational hypnosis side. And I think I mentioned to you before, at some point over those few years that I was self-teaching, I got your street hypnosis deck. I remember getting that, which would have been about, I don't know, 2002 or something, 2003, something like that. Which was really cool.
And just kind of go back into this idea here, because there's a lot of people who are self-taught, but most of the people I've noticed who say they're self-taught, either been to a seminar of some sort, they're very hesitant, they're very abstract in their thinking. They've learned a lot, they've read a lot, but you ask them what have they done, what have they achieved with it, they usually get very shy and hesitant and go, well, I haven't really done anything, I'm not quite ready for that yet. But you were somehow different, weren't you? There's something about how you self-studied that wasn't just abstract theoretical stuff. It was a more practical thing.
For
sure. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and where that came from?
Yeah, I can. I mean, to this day, it's still the case, because people contact me and say, James, I would like you to privately teach me conversational hypnosis or hypnotic language patterns, or however they frame it.
Right.
And my first question is, what's your context? And people say, well, I just want to learn it, and I'm
right. Yeah, but that's not the context of one. What do you want to use it for, right?
Exactly. What do you want to use it for? Because I know that we can pick an area and we can really build some fantastic skills in that area, and then it will generalize out into their lives. But trying to do it in generality in some flaky, I don't know where space, it doesn't tend to work. Now, the thing that I had for me is I had areas of application right from the get-go.
Okay.
So I was teaching martial arts. So this was a place where I first, in fact, it was in a Tai Chi class that I first ever consciously and deliberately used Ericksonian language patterns to
Fantastic.
facilitate some processes. And it was this moment that convinced me that there was something really powerful to this stuff. Now, what it was is I would lead the Neigong session. Neigong means internal skill.
Yeah.
So I would.
So it's a kind of a guided. So for people who know this, it's a kind of a guided meditation which deals with the physical body a lot and the internal energy system. But really, although you're standing, it's not really any different to a sitting down meditation, except that you're not sitting down. Right?
That's right. It's just more adapted for martial arts, where being on your feet is a more useful thing. And it's tuning people in. It's building internal acuity for subtle alignments and all manner of subtleties within the body. So I'd always done this a particular way. However, the ways my teachers had influenced me in doing it. And one day I decided I was going to do the whole thing Milton Erickson style.
Right.
So I began pacing and leading, as you're here now in this space, listening to the sound of my voice, feeling the weight of your body on your feet, da-da-da-da-da, and all of this.
Yeah.
And off I went into just facilitating the process, but using Milton language.
Right.
And then after, it's about a 15-minute process. And when sort of coming out the other end, one of my students, Ian, he was stood over to my left. I was facing the group. And he kind of just went, whoa. And I said, what? He said, that was the most intense Neigong session I have ever done.
That's amazing. That's a good feedback, right?
It was. Now, here's the thing. I was curious because I've been hanging back from using the language because I was afraid that it would sound weird and people would think I was funny and all of this kind of stuff.
Of course. This is a very natural reaction people have, right?
Right. So it was my first bold step in actually doing it, going all out. So I was curious. I said, did you notice me doing anything different? And he looked at me quizzically and said, no.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was huge.
That's
for me.
Wonderful. For sure.
I realised he was so absorbed in the experience, he didn't paying a jot's worth of attention to what I was saying on that level.
And it's a great proof of concept for you to suddenly realise, you've kind of made this up a little bit. You're self-taught. You took a risk, and everything you feared it wasn't not just that what you feared didn't come to pass. It's quite the opposite. You had an amazing reaction, and no one even noticed that you were the one that was different in it, right?
Yeah, no one noticed me using weird language or being different in any kind of way. So that was. I mean, at that point, the kind of floodgates opened, and I started not just leading the Neigong session in that, but when I'm giving people corrections, I'm putting it in Milton language, so as to, because if you think about it, with anyone who understands the internal martial arts and the Taoist background, it's grounded in Taoism. There's the whole idea of doing without doing.
Right, which sounds a lot like Erickson's, middle of nowhere space and trusting the unconscious sort of thing, right?
And certainly allowing things to happen rather than consciously making things happen. So that was a huge thing. It was very congruent with the Tai Chi. So I suddenly learned, instead of saying to people, try and relax more when you do that, which didn't work so well, of just being able to say, and notice how different it is now when you allow a little more relaxation. And to be able to do things in that way, I mean, it was huge. It really did make a difference to how I was able to assist people in connecting with what they needed to connect to for being good at Tai Chi.
Wonderful. And how did this sort of seed experience, how did that grow? Because you clearly didn't get stuck in just using it as a martial arts teaching application. You've evolved this well into the other areas in the world as well.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, there's a couple of other areas. I mean, in parallel to that, I mentioned that the other thing when I saw Darren Brown was I got the Magic and Showmanship book by Henning Nelms.
Of course.
And then I got immediately I started exploring with mentalism.
And for those people who are not sure what mentalism is a branch of magic in terms of entertainment magic, sleight of hand type stuff, and they specialize in creating the illusion of having some kind of psychic power or special mental powers, whereas the rest of magic is more generic. Mentalism specifically focuses on, looking like you're a psychic or that you have mind reading potential or things like that, which is why Darren Brown blended it so well with hypnosis then, right?
So somebody asked me at a conference I spoke at a few years ago, what's mentalism? And it just came out of my mouth before I realized what I said. I said, it's like magic, only you pretend it's real. And
You know what?
I thought
That's a really nice way of putting it. I like that.
it just about sums it up. But I got really into it, and I got some of the classics. I got Corinda's 13 Steps to Mentalism,
Right, and
things
Animan,
like
of course.
Yeah, and I started doing stuff with this, and one of the first things I also bought was a program called Wonder Words by a guy called Kenton Nepper.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about that, because that really is part of the hypnosis journey, right?
Yeah, I mean, huge. It was a huge thing. Basically, Kenton Nepper, he's an NLP trained. I believe he trained with Rex Sykes originally. And he's a magician, fantastic magician and mentalist as well. So Wonder Words was a package he put together, which was taking ideas from NLP, especially Milton language, and applying them within context. Again, that question, what's your context? The context here was performance of close-up magic or stage magic, and looking at how you could create these psychological subtleties with words that would massively enhance what you are doing.
Well, he's using the hypnotic language essentially to put the magic back into magic, so it feels magical rather than just being a trick.
Right, absolutely, and it was gold for me, and I started doing a lot of stuff and using ideas from Wonder Words, and I got very much into the psychological end of mentalism.
Right. So now just share us a little bit of this part of the journey, because you a moment ago you were telling us how you were still very shy and hadn't overcome your social anxieties yet, even whilst you were teaching martial arts, and suddenly you're here doing essentially performance magic, with complete strangers. I mean, that's a huge leap. How did that come about?
Right. It came about sort of quickly and slowly at the same time. That initially I did what most people do with the mentalism, is I started showing stuff to my friends and family, my close friends and family. Right.
Because that's an easier social context to manage, right?
Certainly. The idea of going out there in the world with these raw skills and trying to...
Right. I mean, that takes some guts. I mean, I know people do it, but it's very rare because you get the trick wrong and then you look embarrassed, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it was... That was a big step, but initially it became very, very clear that I couldn't really develop by practicing stuff with friends and family only, because I'd had to keep getting fresh stuff together for them.
Right. So you have to keep learning new stuff because they've seen the old tricks and then they get bored, right?
Instead of mastering one or two or three things, I was ending up being an amateur at hundreds of things.
Right. So basically your drive for learning, your love of learning, is kind of what drove you through your anxieties into a bigger arena. Is that kind of what happened?
For sure, the whole thing is driven by development, right? I've decided I want to have these Darren Brown skills, and I've gone as far as I can within this context in working these Darren Brown skills up. So the next thing that needs to happen is I have to go out into the world and do it.
Right. So if we were pulling a principle out of this, it sounds very much like having a higher purpose, having an ideal that really inspires you. That gets you through a lot of hurdles, it sounds like. At least in your life it was the case.
For sure, and this is the thing, because I mean, I know I've said this to people in the past. There's been times where I've sat outside. For a time I even ended up performing professionally as a mentalist. This is a little bit further down the track from where we are,
of course,
in the story now. But the first few gigs I did, I sat in the car wanting to throw up, and just being racked with absolute terror. One of the worst is I turned up to do a gig at a gala ball, a charity dinner with celebrities and things at it. And I looked at the table plan, and Paul Daniels and Debbie McGee were there, and I was going to have to be doing...
Wow. Just to put in perspective for our non-UK friends here, Paul Daniels is a very, very famous TV magician in the UK. He's been on TV forever. I mean, he's had like 2 decades worth of shows every single week. So he's really the gold standard of magic acts. And to suddenly be in a place where you have to perform in front of the magician, the of the day. Wow, it's like for Americans to go in front of David Copperfield and do a little magic trick and say, look, I can fool you, David Copperfield, who's just got rid of an entire jumbo jet. It's a big deal, right?
Yeah, it was a big deal, and particularly, Paul Daniels had a reputation in the world of magic for being unforgiving, let's say.
Oh, just to make life easier.
Yeah. No, so that was a moment of terror. But I mean, rolling back from there was the point that came where I was like, I'm going to have to go out into the world and do this. And I did. I remember the first experience of me going out into the world and doing this. Before I share this experience, do we have language constraints on this?
No, just go ahead. I'm going to presume that there's going to be a few stronger words coming out. So
Yeah.
for the next segment, anyone who's a little delicate, just feel free to skip forward a bit.
This is the trigger warning in modern parlance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a fan of it, but if some people are more sensitive, then go ahead and skip ahead. And James, now you can you drop the bomb on us.
Okay, so this is the first time I ever went out. And it was in a local bar. I met a friend of mine there for moral support. We had a pint each.
Right.
And I just thought, right, I've got to do it. I had a deck of cards. I was going to go up and do, I can't even remember what I would have done, probably just some card mind-reading thing.
Right.
And I plucked up the courage and I went over to this table. And it was awful. It was horrible. I take 100% responsibility for this. I said, excuse me, I'm just learning magic. And I wondered if... And this guy, this is as far as I got, this guy rolled his eyes balefully up at me and said, "Fuck off, mate."
Wow. That especially for someone with social anxiety, that must have been a heavy blow.
It was a heavy blow, but this is the thing. Because I was so deep into this belief from NLP that it's just patterns. We can change anything. We can repattern ourselves. And I'd gone deep into NLP and I'd really looked at the presuppositions as well. So this idea people are not their behaviour.
Yes.
That was a huge thing for me because I knew that his response was a response to my behaviour.
That's a wonderful reframe. That's actually a very healthy way of looking at it, because now changing a behaviour is easy. Changing yourself, I mean, that's a much more difficult endeavour, right?
Absolutely. So as much as I didn't want that response, obviously, it had me look and go, what did I do? How did I create that response? And taking, I'm supposed to be the influencer here. This is what I'm learning to do. I'm learning to influence people. Yeah. I'm learning to move people's minds. Well, that was crash and burn on attempt number 1.
Right.
But how do I want to do this differently next time?
Right. And that's the attitude. I think that's a really healthy attitude. A lot of people I've noticed in hypnosis, when they have their first failure, they feel so afraid they don't want to try again. But, you know the old saying, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you have a healthy attitude towards them. And it sounds like you got your attitude from this whole idea of you can learn anything with perseverance, and if you know what patterns to look for. And between those two, like mental formulae, if you like, it inoculated you against the worst impact of these negative moments. I'm not saying that you weren't emotionally affected, of course you would be, but your resilience is higher because you have hope. You have a sense of, I can do something about this, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's a great word, resilience, because I often say to people, I hear people bagging out NLP all the time, and I'm not, I have my reservations about some aspects of NLP. I'm not one who cries from the rooftops that it's all perfect and wonderful. Right. But the thing that I cannot get away from is NLP changed my life profoundly and fundamentally. Really it did, and one of the key areas it changed my life in is it massively upgraded my personal resilience.
Yes.
Hugely.
Yes. Just by switching out a few filters, right? Just looking at the world a little differently. Right. There's a difference between being a victim and being a hero. A victim gets crushed by life. A hero bounces back from any challenge, right?
Absolutely. So, I had the ability to absorb things. I didn't find them pleasant to absorb, but I could absorb them.
No.
And again, NLP presuppositions is, how do I take this as feedback and use this? What can I learn from this, and what can I do differently next time? So these were things I'd learnt from NLP. And also, one of the other things that I'd really relentlessly drilled myself in from NLP was outcome thinking.
Yes.
What do I want? What do I want? How do I take this, use this, and move towards what I want?
Right.
So that was a huge thing. So I made rapid adjustments, and I carried on going out there in the world and figuring out how to engage strangers and wow them and have them believe all manner of things and that kind of thing.
Right, right. So that's a second very strong context. So you had the teaching context where you had your first win with hypnosis, a very powerful win. Then the second context was the magic acts that you were doing, taking it to the streets and taking personal risk with it. That's actually not to be underestimated with people. If you want to grow quickly, you've got to take some risks. And the risks can be calculated. They can be safe risks, but you still have to take those risks. Otherwise, you'll be forever stuck in a loop which doesn't go anywhere, right?
Right, yeah.
And you mentioned there's another area in which you use this stuff as well. Could you talk a little bit about that one too?
For sure. So the parallel thread on all of this is that professionally, having learned martial arts and this kind of thing, I'd decided that I was going to become a manual therapist, an osteopath specifically.
Right, right. And of course, it makes sense with internal martial arts. It's all about internally aligning the body. Being an osteopath, which basically aligns the bones of the body, it has a very close parallel. Everything you know about the body will naturally feed into that, right?
That was my figuring at the time. I thought, right, I'm interested in this. I want to deepen my understanding and knowledge of the human body. What appealed to me actually about it more than anything else was the idea that I would be my boss.
Yes. That's a big dream for most people.
Yeah, it was a major piece for me back then. And I pretty much got accepted to do osteopathy. I think around about I would have started September 2001, I think. And I think around about then. So it would have literally been just before I'd seen that Darren Brown shows.
Right.
So it was a parallel thing, and it became a very obvious context for me to start using some ideas from NLP, and again specifically around the hypnotic end of NLP, the Milton language.
Right. So this would be your first use of hypnotic language as a tool for healing, right?
Yes, because I mean, just to give a very, very simple example, stuff like trigger point work. So you find a trigger point in the muscle, an area where there's, it's knotted, it's tight, and to release that, you would apply pressure. And it can be very uncomfortable, and you just keep the pressure there until it eases. So how you manage that, you want to encourage relaxation, all of these kinds of things. So I would use Milton-based suggestions to say, okay, you'll feel a little pressure here. That's right. And just let me know as you're feeling this now. Just let me know as this begins to ease.
Nice.
So I would be augmenting what I was doing physically. With hypnotic language, thinking what's the direction we want to be leading this in.
And of course, this is a great place for you to test your more covert conversational hypnosis skills, because this is a wonderful scenario, because people are so focused on the body, just like in your Negung session, they probably don't even realize you're talking to them in any special way. They think you're just a caring therapist with a good bedside manner, right?
Yeah. I mean, and at this stage, I mean, all of the three areas for me were 100% what I would call, conversational or covert. They're under the radar, because even with the magic stuff, people would go, well, I get that's overt, right? Well, actually, a lot of it's peripheral to what you're doing. Yes. It's the suggestions that come into the side, and they're being delivered conversation. I may be doing a card trick.
Yeah.
But I riffle down the side of the deck, and I say stop, and say stop anywhere you like, and they say stop, and I say, so did you stop there for a reason?
Yeah.
Which is reinforcing the idea that they stopped there.
Of course.
In reality, I'm manipulating things. I stopped exactly where I intended to stop.
Right. And so this is the genius of the Kenton Knepper system of using the Milton model of hypnotic language, because he's already thought through these implications and these subtleties, and he just gives them to you prepackaged. They're not quite as useful outside of the magic world, but within the magic world, they can totally transform your performance and the reaction to your performance, right?
Absolutely, and it's still covert hypnosis, if you like, because it's there.
Well, right.
To support what you're doing, perhaps mechanically with a magic effect or this kind of thing.
And by the way, to me, that's, I think, the ultimate use of hypnosis anyways. It's a augmenter. It enhances whatever else you're doing, be it teaching or entertaining or healing. It's an augmenter of other things that we do. On its own, it's just a weird phenomenon. It's when you augment other things that I think it really comes into its own, right?
Absolutely, and I think this is a huge thing for hypnotic language, say Milton language, there's an old story. I don't know how true it is, but I heard this from somebody who was around at the time, and allegedly it is so.
Right.
That Ericsson said of Bander and Grinder, those boys have really cracked the nut on my work. The trouble is they took the shell but left the nut.
Yeah. Ericsson famously wasn't a big fan of them. He used to call them, swindler and bandit, because he thought that he just thought that they had made it over rigid in terms of just codifying things. And he has a point, but at the same time, it makes it a lot easier for people to grasp in the first place. So I think NLP has a very useful foundation set, as long as you're happy to break with the NLP tradition and go your own way eventually, right?
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, if you actually look at that metaphor, the shell and the nut, the shell is not a useless thing.
No.
It is the delivery system for the seed. And I think looked at that level, I think that that's a fair comment. They took the delivery system but left the seed. So this is my point again when people say, will you teach me hypnotic language? And I say, what's your context? Right. I want to know what's the seed that you want to deliver.
Right. Which nuts do you want to, are you talking hazelnuts, walnuts? What's the nut you want to deliver?
Yeah.
That'll decide how I form my shell around that, right?
Right. And I see this a lot. I see people who learn they learn hypnotic language and they don't understand. They sit down and they just cannot do any trance work with people because they've got the delivery system, but they don't have the content.
Absolutely, and of course the content is always. I find myself like this as well. To this day, I cannot just do an induction. I need to have a reason for the induction. What do you want, right? What's the problem? Where do you want to get to? Once I have that, then I have something to do. It's like saying to someone, let's have a conversation. Great. What do you want to talk about? Well, I don't know, just have to have a conversation. That doesn't work. You've got to talk about something. And I think that's kind of your point here, which is you don't learn conversational or any kind of hypnosis in isolation. You learn it for a specific purpose, and that way you understand it within its context. Is it achieving the influence you want or not? That's a lot easier to tell when you actually have an outcome in mind, right?
Absolutely. So, this is a huge thing, and I was very grateful to have context and have things that I could use and explore this stuff with, because it truly is gold if you know what you want to do with it.
Now, you mentioned something very important here, which maybe you can say a little bit more about, because you've hinted at it a number of times that your learning process was a little unique to other people's, and of course the way you look at NLP and hypnosis in general is influenced by your general paradigm about learning in general. Could you say a little bit about what your whole approach to learning in general is, and how that influenced the way you looked at hypnosis? Because you one thing that really characterizes your work, and I really like about your work, is it's almost atheoretical. I know you have a theory that underpins it in some ways, but you're not stuck on a theory. You're not stuck on someone else's theory. You're not stuck in a school, and my teacher said so-and-so, so I've got to do this. And of course, the Chinese martial arts are a great example of this, because you know how they're obsessed with lineage, and almost you can be a crap practitioner, but if your lineage is good, everyone will kowtow to you. Whereas if you're a great practitioner, but your lineage is a bit dodgy, they'll look down on you. So there's that problem of lineage going on there. But you have a very unique perspective on that. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that and how you broke free of this sort of almost tyranny of lineage?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me is I'm a very proactive learner, and I've said this to many people. I've said anyone I've ever met who is really great at what they do is a self-directed learner.
I would agree with that, yeah.
And that is not to diminish the value of teachers and mentors and all of that. The way I see teachers and mentors is that they are resources to be made use of. Not someone to roll over to and to not think critically about and kowtow to and all of this kind of thing. So one of the things that was true for me is I didn't buy into that early on. At one point with Tai Chi, I had 5 different Tai Chi teachers at the same time.
Wow. And then just to put it in perspective for people who practice Chinese martial arts, teachers are very possessive of their students, and the idea that you go to a different school, that's like treason. That's like, you betrayed me, how could you? Which of course is not the case, but it's a cultural issue, right?
It's a huge thing. So I was going to these think I was doing 2 private lessons a week and 3 classes. And with each one, I had to remember, right, how is it that I do it with this one, and not have too much contamination coming across. If I'd have been allowed more cross-pollination within the sessions, I probably would have got even more out of it. But
Right. But you had to be very careful to only do this master system this day and this master system that day, because otherwise, what is correct in one system is considered real bad in another system, and vice versa. And what did that do for you? Having these different perspectives and having people give you these rigid rules where literally what was optimal for one system is now suddenly considered terrible in another system, but still both systems work. How did that affect you in terms of your understanding about the learning process?
Well, it was excellent for me, because for me the metaphor was putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Now I had one main teacher who was incredible, and he could just do incredible things. And he was sort of my reference point for what I wanted to attain.
Right.
But out of all my teachers, he was by far the worst.
So he's the best practitioner, so he's the best role model. It's just in terms of teaching and transmission skills, they were much poorer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He'd just look and you'd say, well, how do you do it? He'd say, well, you just do it. That's all he ever said.
Very frustrating, I could imagine.
Yeah, so I had to go find these other teachers who were lesser in ability as practitioners, but and of course different teachers have their different areas of interest and specialism, and different strengths and different weaknesses.
Right.
So to put that whole picture together, it really helped me to work with all these teachers. And the thing that it became incredibly clear that in all the classes that I was in, I was accelerating past everybody else, because they weren't doing this.
Right. So the this you're referring to importantly is the multiple perspectives, where you are doing the same techniques 5 different ways, remembering 5 different ways and 5 different points. And somewhere between that, your unconscious kind of generalized the pattern and realized, these are variations, these are options, and the core common theme is this. So you focus more on the core, because the periphery, that's not so important anymore, right?
Absolutely. So it really helped me get down, get a real kind